Mom. Gilbert was so excited. Mom, where are you? He ran in the door and was looking around for his mom. He had just been to his Cub Scout meeting, and he was 8 years old, and he had found out some really exciting news. Mom, where are you? Well, Mom said, in here, Gilbert. And Gilbert ran. Mom, guess what we're going to do? Gilbert, what on earth do you have in your hand? There was a board, there were some wheels, and there was some paper. Mom, it's a special project we had in Cub Scouts today. We're going to work with our dads, and we're going to make a race car. And then in a few weeks, we're going to have a special race with that race car. Mom, do you think Dad will help me? Do you think he will? No. Well, that was what Mom was thinking in her head. No, you're exactly right. Because even though Dad was pretty good at making things, unfortunately, he was not the kind of dad who liked to do things with his kids. Now, a lot of dads love to do stuff like fish and read stories and talk, but he worked hard, but he just, I'm too tired, I'm too busy. But Gilbert had hope, and he ran into his dad, and he said, Dad, can you help me on this? I'm watching the news, go away. Oh, well, maybe I'll find him at a time when he's, like, not quite so busy. So he found a time a couple days later where Dad didn't seem so busy. Dad, do you think you could help me make this race car? We could do it together? Too busy, son. Don't even ask me. And so the car, well, the wood that was going to be a car, lay up there on the shelf. Oh, Gilbert was so disappointed because he had been so excited about that race. What was he going to do? Well, even though Gilbert didn't have a dad who really cared about helping him a lot, he had a mom who cared about helping him quite a bit. And so he asked his mom, and his mom said, well, son, you know, some moms are really good about making things and some aren't. I'm not very good, but I'll be glad to read the directions to you and encourage you. And so that's what Mom did. She got and she said, okay, this is how big it says it's supposed to be, and these are the rules. And she got him little cookies and snacks and stuff to kind of encourage him along and told him he was going to do a good job. And Gilbert made that little race car with his mom's help. And when he got done with it, he felt kind of proud, like, wow, I made that all by myself. That was great. And he tried it. It was a little lopsided, but it went actually pretty fast. And so he says, you know, I'm going to name this car. I'm going to call it Blue Lightning because it's going to be so fast it's going to win the race. And so he painted the car blue, and he was, like, so proud of it. Finally came the night of the big race. He went to Dad, and he said, Dad, do you think you could come and watch me? Too busy, son. Can't do it. And so Mom took him to the Cub Scout meeting. And Gilbert was sitting there with the race car in his lap. He was so proud of it until he got to the Cub Scout meeting. And he went to the Cub Scout meeting and saw all the other kids' race cars. Because, you see, the other kids had really fancy race cars, and they were streamlined, and they were painted with cool colors, different shades, and they had race stripes, and he wasn't quite so proud of his, but he decided, well, that's not really the important thing. The important thing is how fast it is. Maybe Blue Lightning will be really fast. And so they started the race. Now, this particular race had two people race together, and then another two, and then another two, and then another two. And whichever one of the two won, then let's say Elizabeth won, and Iden won, then Elizabeth and Iden would race theirs, and whichever one on that one would do. And finally, it came down, believe it or not, Blue Lightning won the first heat and the second. And finally, there were only two people left, Gilbert with Blue Lightning and Tommy. And Tommy had this really cool-looking car. It was so sleek. It had been so fast in every race Tommy had done. And he had his dad just right there by him. And Gilbert's like, oh, I don't know. And the judge said, okay, boys, are you ready? And Gilbert said, can I have just a minute first, please? I'm just not quite ready. And so the judge said, okay. And so Gilbert went there with his little blue car, and he knelt down, and he started praying with his car. And everybody just kind of looked, and it was a really long minute. And then he got up with a smile, and he said, okay, now I'm ready. And so here was Gilbert's car here. And here was Tommy's car. And just as Gilbert thought might happen, Tommy started going faster down the lane, faster and faster. But Gilbert's car started catching up with it. And pretty soon they were like almost the same. And by the time they got to the finish line, Gilbert's car was just a teeny bit ahead. He had won. And all the people go, yay, yay. And the judge came up, and he was ready to hand the ribbon to Gilbert. And he turned to Gilbert and he said, so Gilbert, wow, you prayed that your car would win, and God answered your prayer. And Gilbert looked all surprised, and he goes, well, no, sir. I didn't pray about that. I didn't pray that my car would win. I prayed that God would help me be brave when I lost, so I wouldn't cry when I lost. And then all the people started really clapping because they realized that they had learned a very important lesson. You know, if you have a good mom and dad, and I think all of you do, did you know you can, if you're polite, you can tell them almost anything you want to, whatever is on your heart? Yeah, anything. You could say, Mom, I'm sad. Mom, I'm angry. Mom, I'm upset. Mom, I'm excited. Dad, I want to tell you this. Mom, I don't think you were fair to me. But you know something? God is exactly the same way. You can tell God anything, just the same way. And so Gilbert could have said to God, oh, God, it's not fair. All these other people, all these other boys, they had a dad with them, and I didn't have a dad. But instead he said, God, would you be my dad? And God, even if this is a tough situation, would you help me do my best on that? And all the older people realized, God will help us through any situation, because with God, we can do anything. And when you pray, you can tell God anything you want to, but say, God, can you help me through this tough situation? Okay?
Letter to the Philippians, Paul writes saying, he says, don't worry about anything. He says, don't be anxious about anything, but rather pray about everything. So right now, just wherever you are, I would invite you to stand, sit, kneel, whatever you're comfortable with, and I just want to bring our worries and our anxieties to our God in prayer. So would you join me in prayer at this time? Dear Lord, you are our God of peace who brings peace to our lives, Lord. Right now, God, there's a lot of us in here, and we all have our own worries and our own anxieties coming up this week and this next month, decisions to make, Lord. And at this time, I just want to offer these anxieties and worries up to you, Lord. I want to ask that you would give us peace and help us to feel your presence in the midst of the different storms that we're going through, God. Jesus, I want to also raise up prayer requests for people who are hurting right now, physically. There's a baby in our community who needs some healing. Lord, I want to ask that your hands would be on that family and that baby. Jesus, other people are going through other physical problems. I ask that you would heal them, Lord. Give them peace and comfort. Jesus, as we go on with this worship service, let us remember that you're not a God who causes worry or anxiety. And if we're feeling that, help us to realize that is not from you, for you only give us love and peace. Thank you for who you are, Jesus. We love you. Amen.
that time, worship and song. Sometimes I think music goes right to the core, doesn't it? Yeah, that's a blessing. There's an old saying: "He who sings prays twice." Yeah. All right. Loneliness, isolation, solitude are often very fertile places for fresh thought and revelations that just pop into your head. And as I was preparing this message, my mind went back to a time almost 25 years ago. I was in Korea. I had been traveling with the president of the company, and he had gone down to Taiwan. We had been in China. He went down to Taiwan, and I was in Korea by myself, sitting in a hotel room and feeling that isolation, that loneliness, the language barriers, and there I was, there I was wondering and thinking about my family. And as I sat there and experienced that time, I decided there was this pad of paper and a pen, and I started thinking about fond thoughts about my family. And I started with my youngest son, Jacob, and I wrote him a letter looking at the qualities of who he is and how proud I was. And then next to Jeremy, the middle, my oldest son, and I wrote to him, and I remember, Jeremy was, I said, you ought to be a lawyer one day, because he was so able to defend every action of his. And then I moved to Rebecca, our oldest, our daughter, and wrote to her, the warmth of a dad toward his daughter, But then it came to Cheryl's turn. And as I was writing my letter to Cheryl about my love for her, and just remembering back to the first time I saw her in that choir room at the school musical, and seeing the brightness of her smile and her interacting with the other altos around her, and just sitting in the bass section looking across at her and saying, I was shy, and I said, you need to meet that girl. It just was clearly in my head. And so I did. And the end of the story there. But as I was writing, all of a sudden, some words went onto the page. Have you ever written something and it's like, whoa, and it just stops you dead in your tracks? And these words went on the page, and it said, you have become my very best friend. Boom. And I just stopped. And I looked at that, and I'd never thought of that. It's one thing to be in love with someone. It's another thing to be in like with them. And our friendship had just blossomed into the place where we had become best friends. And in that moment, I just cherished that thought. Friendship, deep friendship, intimate friendship is developed over time, isn't it? And it's, those best friends that we have in our lives, we can be separated by miles and time. And when you get together with that kind of a friend again, it's like you were never apart. The years don't seem to matter. Friendship. What a treasure it is, because we are hardwired for relationships, aren't we? God made us with a need to be able to interact with people, to be blessed, and to be connected with them. And in that moment, I felt so blessed, far away, and yet knowing that she was indeed my best friend. So, Jesus, as we talked about last week, Jesus took these last precious moments of his life on this earth. They had had the Lord's Supper together, which was the Passover, and he instituted new meanings to old symbols. And as they crossed the Kidron Valley and were going up the Mount of Olives, there on the sides of that mountain were grapevines. And he shared, I am the vine, you are the branches. And what we learned last week in part 1 is that the prime directive is not to bear much fruit. That is the end result. But it is not the prime directive. What Jesus said was, remain in me. If I remain in you and you remain in me, you will bear much fruit, but apart from me, you can do nothing. So the prime directive, oftentimes we get it all backwards, thinking that our job is to produce fruit. And so we will. But the main job is the thing that gets attacked most, our connection with Jesus. When troubles come, when difficulties come, when isolation comes, Jesus, the one that we connect with, is the one who bears fruit through us. Because our DNA, our whole wiring is to produce fruit. It's like a cherry branch knows to produce cherries. It can't do anything else, but you cut it off and it can't produce cherries. A grapevine, if you cut off the branch, it can't bear fruit. But it's got everything in it necessary. As Christians, we're the same way. How do we bear fruit? It's by staying connected to Jesus. And we can't help but bear fruit. So all we have to do is one thing. Yeah, right? Simple. Just stay connected with Jesus. Simple, right? So, in this next section, I have to say that it looks like it's disjointed from the vine and the branches. But it's clearly part of the discourse that Jesus had, because it ends with talking about bearing fruit. But he gives this whole thing about friendship. And I have to say, I have struggled over what is this in here for? What does it mean? I've struggled with it, and I feel like I have something really special to share that connected the whole thing for me. So we read, as Jesus talks about friends in verse 15, he says, instead, I have called you friends. Friendship. That precious gift of friendship. Those people in our lives. But Jesus said, I have called you friends. In John chapter 15, then, starting in verse 9, as we walk through this, he says, as the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Now remain in my love. And you think about this. Remain in his love. Now, this is unbounded love. Immeasurable love. It is the very character of God. It is the very nature of God. It is immeasurable. And he says, remain in my love. Now notice he uses the word remain again. Or in some translations, abide, right? Abide in my love. So now he's beginning to define just what it is to be connected and what it is that is bearing fruit in us. It's God's love. Okay? So his love is unbounded. It is immeasurable. It is his very character. There is no degree. There is no measurement of it. And notice that he says, as the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Now remain in my love. And this is a little mathematical equation. A equals B, B equals C, then A equals C. That means that the same love that Jesus experiences with the Father is the love that we experience with him. It's not measured out. It is without measure. God's love for us is immeasurable, and it's the same love that He gives His Son, He gives for us. That's powerful. Being connected with that love. And I don't know about you, but sometimes I have a hard time allowing myself to be loved. Anybody like that? Huh? Feeling worthy of the kind of outpouring of love that you've experienced in a relationship or in a friendship? Feeling unworthy. But that love is there. Regardless of whether we receive it or not, that love is abundantly available to everyone beyond measure. It is only limited by our willingness to receive it. Profound. Continuing on then. In 1 John chapter 4, verse 8, we read, "Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love." You can't say Rick is love. You can't say Cheryl is love. You can't say Dan is love. Only God is love. We are capable of loving and being loved, but we are not love. God alone is love. He is the source of all of it. He is the source of love, and He pours it out upon each one of us. His love. So Jesus continues on in verse 10. He says, if you keep, this is an if then. If you keep my commandments, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in His love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. Well, when we really truly experience joy, when we truly experience joy, the kind of joy that just bubbles up inside of us, isn't it connected with feeling that sense of being loved and accepted? To feel safe in a place, to feel at peace in a place, it's a space in here where there's freedom and the ability to truly experience love is a joyful experience. Joyful experience. So Jesus says, if you obey my commands, you will remain. And see, He keeps using this word, remain or abide, right? If you remain in my love, well, so which comes first? Remaining in Jesus' love or keeping the commandments? Remaining in His love. If you abide in me, you will keep my commandments. It's empowered by the love of God working in us. How many lives have been destroyed by trying to keep His commandments? I'll do it if it kills me. And it will. And you'll probably take some others with you in the process. One thing I know about my relationship with Cheryl since we started there, with that story today, is that when I first married Cheryl, I was totally infatuated with her and I loved her. Now, Cheryl and I are different, and that's how this whole thing works. I mean, we are different people, right? And I may have to buy Cheryl an outfit out of this. I hadn't planned to say it. Cheryl is a little more structured in her life than I am. I am more random, okay? As you can see with the announcements, you never know what I'm going to say. But Cheryl is a little more structured, and there are things that are important to her. And as I have fallen more and more deeply committed and in love with Cheryl and have grown to respect her more and more, I incorporate those things into my life because I love her. They're meaningful to her. They're important to her. And so I have made changes in my life. And she does the same for me. Because, okay, maybe the outfit's going this way a little bit. All right. So she has made adjustments for me and made allowances for my idiosyncrasies and yeah. But it's a give and take kind of thing in a marriage, isn't it? Well, I think it's one of the most the closest to a reflection of our relationship with God is that the more we come to know Him and love Him and trust Him, the more we are able to allow changes to come over our broken character and become more like Him because we want to. But wait, the best is yet to come. So which comes first, remaining in Jesus' love or keeping His commandments? And I would say that it's in staying connected with Jesus and learning to love Him and trust Him more and more that our very actions are changed. Our desires are changed. The way we see things is changed. And the way we see things, when that's changed, and the way we think, when that's changed, we begin to respond to the world differently. We begin to respond to people differently. It's so hard to try to reach up to a human standard of something that is impossible and it is God's size. Somehow we get a convoluted idea in our heads that we can define infinity, we can define perfection, and then try to attain to it. And I'll tell you what, when I define perfection, it's going to be something that I can do. And others can't. It's interesting that Jesus was persecuted for keeping the commandments by people who figured they had God figured out. And it put Him on the cross. Jesus kept the commandments in a way that other people couldn't see and understand. Yeah, it's remaining in His love. Then Jesus transitions to friendship, and He says, greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. And this is the fullest definition of friends. Love in action. That Jesus counted each one of us, you and me, because through eternity, He knew that what He did was significant for His friends that weren't even born yet, and those who had been long in the grave. Jesus' friendship was demonstrated in counting everyone more important than the life that He was living on this earth, and He poured Himself out for His friends. Love is demonstrated in our actions because it comes from a heart that is focused outside of ourselves, an unselfish expression that makes a difference, a positive difference in other people's lives. You know, I've shared with people and my own children and myself, in order to have friends, you must be a friend. The quality of our friendships are affected by how we are with other people. To have friends, we must be a friend. Jesus defined Himself as one who was willing to give everything and call it worth it. He said, you were worth it. And He says then in verse 14, you are my friends if you do what I command. Well, let's take a look at this. What does He command? And we can look at the 10 Commandments. You know, let's just go to the 10 Commandments. But notice in the context of this passage, we see in verses 9b, 10, 12, and 17, we read, "Now remain in my love," that's a command. "Remain in my love," in verse 10. "Love each other as I have loved you," that's verse 12. "This is my command, love each other." That's his command. Love. Love each other. Build community. Make a safe place. And notice the first two are geared toward remain in my love. That's the vertical. Okay? This is what's being poured down to us. That is primary. The first two, remain in my love. Boom. It fills us. And then he says, and love one another. And that's the horizontal. And the cross is right there in love. Community is built on receiving the love of God and then sharing it. But now here comes something that this was the point that just absolutely blew my mind. Listen carefully. Verse 15, "I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends, for everything that I learned from my Father I have made known to you." Okay. So now, like the old Rick would look at this and say, because we like to rank things, right? That the disciples had gotten to the place where Jesus said, okay, you're servants now when I first met you, and now you've gotten to the place where I'm going to call you friends now. You've earned the place of friendship with me, right? Is that right? Could that be? Is that plausible? All right, so you started out and you were servants, and you called me master, but now you've gotten to the place where you've kind of come along and matured enough where I'm going to call you friends now. Right? Oh, wait a minute, though. Let me turn it on its head. Because we're talking friendship, right? Talking friendship. And we've talked about friendship as a matter of intimacy. Well, who knows us more intimately than Jesus? Who knows us more intimately than God? Right? And wasn't Jesus came into the world not to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved, right? So God is already fully engaged with people who don't even know him or like him. And he is a friend to all of humanity. So what if we turn this on its head and say that when he first called the disciples, they looked at him as a master, as their boss. You know, there's not a lot of intimacy between the boss. There are a lot of isolated bosses in this world, aren't there? The boss, anybody who's in leadership, knows that there's this space. The boss is not invited to certain things, certain functions. Jesus was the boss. He was the master. And they were his servants. They were serving him. So what if over the 3.5 years of ministry with Jesus, they came to know him more and more, to see the things he did, to trust him, to see the outpouring of his love, his compassion. They became safer and safer in his presence. And they came to the place that when they were around him, they saw him as a friend. Think about that. It's perfectly reflective of our own friendships in life, that we have come to the place where we trust somebody, mistakes and all, but we are real with each other. We have come to know each other, and our friendship is deep. And that's what Jesus recognized in the disciples. You don't see me as the boss anymore. And I am, I know. Jesus is the boss. He is the Lord. They submit to him, but they submit to him out of friendship instead of out of servitude. That is the journey that we're on. They had come to the place where they had come to know Jesus. Servants become friends because of revelation. Servants become friends because of revelation. Jesus revealed himself. Because God was so distorted in the world that Jesus came into. He had been distorted by the religious leaders of that time. God had become an exacting master. He had become, the God of the smite button and the one who punished people for sin. And Jesus came to heal, to bless, to restore, to guide, to teach. And through the time of revelation, they began to see God as their friend. May it be so for us. And Jesus starts to wrap this up, and I need to do the same. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit. Fruit that will last, and so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. Jesus' friends bear eternal fruit. All that is needed to produce eternal fruit is supplied by the Father. If we see Jesus as a friend and we know the mission that he has given us and we are in that kind of relationship with him, whatever we ask is what would be asked in Jesus' name to accomplish the purpose that God has already wired into us so that he will supply everything we need to go forward. And I'm talking to individuals and I'm talking to the body of believers. It's in the corporate church, it is in the individual that God, when we see him as a friend, when we grow in our trust and our faith in him, when we walk by faith and not by sight, God supplies everything we need to accomplish the purposes for which he set us on this earth. And that's good news. I had to include Romans 5:5 here. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been what? Poured out into what? Our hearts. God's love has been poured out into our hearts. That's that vertical, through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. In Ephesians chapter 3, verse 17 through 19. So that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power together with all the Lord's people, the Lord's holy people, to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ. And know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. Imagine what God wants to do in you. This is my command, he says. Love each other. He said he has appointed us to go and bear much fruit. And today, Cheryl has been working overtime with a team. We have a whole lot of grapes out here. And a social 6-minute social time for you to share and abundantly share these grapes. Good fruit. My friends, we are a community bound by the love of Jesus, in a state of becoming. We are not yet what we will be, but what we will be is glorious. I commend to you Jesus Christ, the true vine, the one who will produce great fruit in and through you. You have purpose. Matters not your age, matters not your experience. You are his, and he is going to bless you. Praise God.